Hey guys, Aaron Cybertron Zhang here, and this is the team builder for week 5 of the GBA. Of course, I'm the coach of the Melbourne Rotoms, and this week we are up against Randy and the Houston Team Rockets. So apologies, first of all, I meant to do one for last week, but I ended up forgetting about it, and I didn't want to miss the upload time, so I wasn't able to do one. Last week actually featured one kind of fun set that I ended up bringing to this week as well, which is the Psychic Z Hypnosis Circuitry. So it actually didn't work out very well last week because, of course, I ended up missing a hypnosis. Not the initial hypnosis, actually, because that didn't end up mattering. But if anything, that put in perspective how wishy-washy it could be. That being said, I actually really liked it going into this week as well, looking at Randy's team. So I decided to bring it. But yeah, of course, as always, this is going to be the team building aspect where I just kind of talk about how I composed the team and how I built it, and you can skip to the battle if you're only interested in that. There's a timestamp linked in the description below. If you do enjoy the GBA and the battles in it, please show support by leaving a like. I'd really appreciate it. So one thing I do want to comment on, first of all, is a lot of people have been like, oh, you know, you're just repeating what you did last season where you're only bringing a 7-mom team. And that has been true the first couple of weeks, but I don't regret that, mainly because I feel like my draft is way stronger than it is last year. Last year I ended up going with a rain draft, and that was super one-dimensional. Like, rain is really easy to prepare for because you know what's happening, right? You know you have to stall out 6 turns of rain, and that's it. I think this draft is relatively one-dimensional in terms of some of the mons I've been using and sets I've been using thus far. But that being said, they are really strong Pokemon, so it is still kind of hard to really beat, especially if I'm able to tech in some moves. So I don't expect myself to be playing with the same mons for the rest of the league, obviously, but I haven't found much of a reason to deviate from what I've been building, like typically, because like Rayquaza, Aegislash, Mamoswine, and Lopunny are just such strong options. It's pretty hard not to bring them in a lot of games, and you'll notice that I flexed a little bit, like obviously Xurkitree in a bunch, Kartana in a bunch, we had Toxapex, and this week you actually notice I did end up actually finally bringing the Wobbuffet because I felt like this was a great week for Wobbuffet to shine. So first of all, if you can see Randy's team on the right side, Randy was obviously undefeated going into this week, so I was very scared about that. But, you know, the main threats on his team were like Yveltal, which I actually have a great matchup against because I've got Mamoswine and Xurkitree, and Rayquaza, if it gets a boost, can just knock it out. Lopunny is obviously faster as well. So while Yveltal had been cleaning house for the other matches, I felt like I actually had an okay matchup against Yveltal because I had some things that could hit it for one shot, basically. The other main threats that I was really worried about, not Clef, but definitely Infernape, definitely Suicune, and then I was actually pretty worried about like Metagross or Hippowdon coming out here. I knew he had run an Assault Vest Metagross previously, and I felt like Metagross could put in some work against my team. You know, obviously I do have Mamoswine, which can do a ton of damage to it. Aegislash can one-shot it, but it is still something that's pretty scary, especially if I don't check it earlier on. I thought Hippowdon would actually be a really big concern because of how well it checked Xurkitree, specifically. Which is why you'll notice that I did tech Grass Knot onto it. So mons that I were definitely expecting were Yveltal, Infernape, Suicune, and then I figured he'd bring a combination of like Roserade, Clef, Metagross, Hippowdon, and Latias. I didn't feel like Lycanroc really had too much space here, especially because obviously I've got Aegislash. I feel like Porygon 2 was more dead weight for him, but I did tech in Toxic on 2 mons specifically if he brought it, just because it could be kind of annoying. I didn't think Jolteon would really make an appearance. It gets maybe one big attack off, but Aegislash and Mamoswine deal with it quite nicely. So I was really expecting basically a couple of main sweepers, and then I did bring Wobbuffet this week because Randy's team is very centered around a couple of defensive mons like Clef, like Roserade, like Porygon, like Hippowdon. So part of the logic this week was I'm going to bring 2 sweepers, which is what I did last week, but with Wobbuffet this week the goal is to maybe trap in one of them or force one of them to switch out so I can get the Z Hypnosis with Xurkitree on a free switching Tail Glow and kind of just sweep from there. Now I didn't really account for Mega Latias too much in building. I figured I had pretty good counters against Latias with Aegislash, Mamo, even Wobbuffet to trap it in, and Rayquaza could knock it out afterwards, after Dragon Dance. So I ended up going with Grass Knot here on Xurkitree instead of HP Ice to really guarantee the knockout onto Hippowdon. But I actually don't remember the calc on what +3 HP Ice is on Hippowdon, so HP Ice might have been better. Otherwise, you guys have seen the sets on the screen. Nothing too crazy here. I haven't been very good with my spreads, mainly because I haven't had time to really finesse them, not at least for this week, but I was relatively content with them, just max bulk and max speed and max offense, basically. For Wobbuffet, you'll notice that I actually went for max HP, max defense, bold nature, and that's specifically to deal with Infernape. Infernape was one of the mons I was most worried about because it could outspeed and one-shot a lot of the things on my team, especially Aegislash, Xurkitree. Lopunny can't knock it down, it will knock me out in return. Close combo will knock out Mamoswine as well. So even though I have a lot of things that one-shot the Infernape, I also have a lot of things that kind of just feint to it. You'll notice that if I check the Infernape and the Yveltal, Aegislash really sweeps through everything. Like, he didn't really have great answers against Aegislash, so that was one thing that I kept in mind. I thought Suicune would actually be really annoying to deal with, but I figured that that's where Wobbuffet could kind of come in. For example, if I brought Toxapex instead of Wobbuffet, Toxapex doesn't really do anything against Suicune, especially if it runs Substitute, but a Wobbuffet can go for an Encore or just Mirror Coat, kind of trap it in. I did go for the Custap Berry because I wanted to potentially get a guaranteed knockout with Destiny Bond, and that was kind of like a tech move. I feel like Wobbuffet's not something people really play against much in general, so it's something to easily forget about as well. And since I haven't brought it up until this point in the GBA, felt like maybe there was some potential there. But pretty standard sets. I went for Life Orb Aegislash. I really like Life Orb Aegislash because Shadow Ball does so much damage to everything. And I did Tekken Head Smash specifically for Yveltal because with Rocks damage, that was actually a guaranteed knockout. So in case he wanted to get cheeky and switch in Yveltal, which is very likely against when you have an Aegislash out, then I figured I could go for Head Smash, take advantage of that, get the knockout. Classic Dragon Dance for Quaza. Ended up going for Admin Nature because I knew I had the Sash anyway, and I knew I was probably going to go for a Dragon Dance, so I wanted the extra damage output instead of Jolly because my goal was to basically set myself up for a late game Rayquaza sweep. I did go with Scarf Mamoswine because I felt like it had a really great matchup against everything that he had, especially the main sweepers in Yveltal, Infernape, and Latias. Can one-shot all of those after Rocks damage, so ended up going for a Scarf variant as I've switched off between like Life Orb and Scarf. I did go for Rocks and Toxic as my last two attacks. I wanted the Toxic because I felt like there were a fair amount of mons you could bring into this game that I'd want a Toxic like Porygon or Suicune, and Toxic could actually go a long way in those mons which typically like to stall out games through healing and through not being a little bit more passive. Of course, Rocks just super helpful, especially against the team with Yveltal and Latias. Already mentioned the Wobbuffet. You really can't do much flexibility with Wobbuffet, but item choice is always important as well as spread. And so like I mentioned, I wanted something to tank Infernape a little bit better, so I went for max HP defense to take a Flare Blitz potentially a little bit better, Custap Berry specifically to get the potential Destiny Bond to get a free knockout on something, and pretty standard set there. I mentioned the Tail Glow Xurkitree already, but I did want to go for that set again with Hypnosis specifically, especially because I figured Suicune would come in this week, and I think there were a lot of potential Pokemon he could have where he basically would have to switch out like definitely or just stay in and take a Hypnosis. Things like Clef, Suicune, Roserade, Porygon, and even Hippowdon are all examples of things that probably aren't going to want to switch out, are going to want to switch out or stay in and just eat up the Hypnosis and can't do too much in return other than maybe Hippowdon Earthquake. So because he had all these more passive mons, I figured this would be a great week because if you stay in with those, then okay, even if you wake up the following turn, I still get the Tail Glow off and you can't really do much. And if you switch out and I hit the Hypnosis, that's super big for me because then you're forced to basically switch out again. I get the Tail Glow off and suddenly you're staring down Xurkitree at +1 speed and +3 special attack, and that pretty much one-shots everything on his team other than Latias. The combination of Thunderbolt and Grass Knot would do enough to knock out everything. I already talked about it. Maybe HP Ice would have been a better call over Grass Knot just because Latias was something that I actually should have probably considered a little bit more going into this week, but yeah. And finally, of course, Mega Lopunny. I ended up going for Encore and Drain Punch and Power Up Punch on this set, so I didn't really feel the need for Fake Out. I didn't think that chip would be too important. The only time I could see myself using it is maybe against the Infernape, but I think I figured I had better options overall. Power Up Punch was something I especially wanted, once again, because he had a lot of passive mons, and figured it could potentially use it against a Porygon, a Hippowdon, or a Suicune, for example. I actually did want to go for Drain Punch this week, once again, because I felt like sustainability was a little bit more important in a week where we're going up against a lot of bulkier Pokemon. And I did opt for Encore specifically to, once again, kind of trap a lot of these bulkier variants. So I ended up going with, still an offensive Lopunny, but one with a little bit more flexibility and ones that can shut down more defensive mons a little bit easier. So yeah. There's the 6 mons I ended up bringing. Didn't feel a great need for Kartana, Azelf, Magmortar, Gligar, and Toxapex. Like, Pex I kind of considered because it obviously matches up well against Infernape, but I figured a lot of things could just switch into Toxapex like Latias or Suicune, and I couldn't really do much in return. And I felt like Wobbuffet filled the bulky role a little bit better this week. Ultimately, going in, I didn't know exactly what he would bring, but I had a couple of things in mind. First of all, the goal really is to sweep with Mamo, Rayquaza, Aegislash, or even Xurkitree. Honestly, like any of those four, obviously, especially Rayquaza and Xurkitree if they get the speed boost up, but One of the nice things about this team is there's so many things that can close out games, so you don't necessarily need to rely on one. It's more about just spreading your damage and getting consistent output, and then depending on how your opponent's been playing, put yourself in a position where one of ideally those 4 mons that I named can really close things out. Obviously Rayquaza and Xurkitree are the 2 main ones I'm looking at, but Mamoswine specifically had a pretty good matchup this week too, so that was kind of the goal. And I wanted to prioritize knocking out Suicune and Infernape if those do come out, because those are the things that can really cause me some trouble. Everything else I wasn't really too worried about. But yeah, that's it for the team building aspect. Let me know what you guys think. Obviously my spreads were not very optimal at all, but I like the game plan going into this week, and I felt like Wobbuffet especially could be really, really fun. So I was hoping that that would do something, and you'll see soon enough whether it actually does something or not. But yeah, it's gonna be it for this one, and we'll see you guys in the battle. Thanks for watching. Hey guys! Aaron Cybertron Zhang here, and we are back for week 5 of the GBA. This week we're up against Randy, the coach of the Team Rocket Houstons. The Houston Team Rockets, excuse me. Of course, we had a pretty tough and close loss last week against Lars and the Borussia Donphan, and going into this week, Randy was actually one of the only undefeated teams left, so I knew it was going to be a tough 2 games last week and this week, and I was really, really scared of playing Randy, obviously, because he had done so well throughout the course of the league, but I definitely was excited for the match as well. As you saw in the team builder, I did end up making a small change this week. I ended up bringing Wobbuffet because I thought this was actually like the perfect week for Wobbuffet. Otherwise, I went with a lot of the same mons that I've gone with in previous weeks, and I know a couple of people have pointed that out about how like it's pretty one-dimensional and predictable, and that was definitely my problem in the first season of the league. That being said, the reason why I have kind of stuck with the same mons more or less this season is because I do feel like my draft is considerably stronger, and last week, for example, I definitely think I probably could have brought a couple of things that I didn't, but there were no regrets really that I had in team building. So I think moving forward, I'm sure we'll see a couple of the other members of my team being used, but the first couple of weeks, the main reason why I haven't deviated from them was because I really truly felt like they were the strongest options, and so that might be a testament to poor drafting on my end, drafting some really strong members and ones that aren't very flexible. But regardless, I did bring Wobbuffet this week because I felt like it would be a really, really good counter to a couple of like the more defensive Pokemon that he had, like Suicune and Clefable, which he did end up bringing. So yeah, of course you can check out Randy, linked in the description below. This is for week 5 of the GBA. Of course, I'm the coach of the Melbourne Rotoms, and apologies for having a post-game battle video. I did do a live recording, but the audio completely messed up, so I have to do a post-game recording, unfortunately. But moving forward, like I mentioned, I'll do my best to do the real-time battle videos. And I haven't really posted any VGC content in quite a while because I've been just hounded with exams, and I'm going on vacation for a bit afterwards, but VGC content will come shortly for those that are waiting. But for now, enjoy the battle. So going into this battle, I decided that Mamoswine was my best lead. You saw the 6 mons that he brought earlier, and more or less those were the things I think I was expecting. I like Mamo as a lead because it forces out like the big offensive threats on his team, and I figured I could take a hit from anything defensive, and I really wanted to prioritize getting rocks up this game, especially because, you know, his strongest Pokemon is of course the Evoltal. So he leads Suicune, which is probably, I would say, my worst case, just because Suicune, of course, does put on pressure against Mamoswine, but I decided to just stay in and go for the rocks because I know I can take a Scald, and I figure he might have something like Substitute or Calm Mind. He actually does have subs, so that's a really good turn for me because I don't take any chances of getting burned here. Obviously, Mamo's not going to do anything here, so I'm going to swap out. This is, of course, Scarf Mamoswine. I did have Toxic as well, but Rocks felt like that was just a really free position to get up. And I'd actually bring out Wobbuffet immediately because one of the reasons I brought Wobbuffet into this matchup was specifically to give Suicune some trouble. Now, unfortunately, I did go for like a max defense Wobbuffet, so Scald actually does a fair amount of damage, as you see there. So kind of my goal right now is to trap the Suicune in and maybe just get up a sweep, like start setting up with either Rayquaza or Xurkitree in the back. Of course, I did have Dragon Dance Rayquaza and the Tail Glow Z Hypnosis Xurkitree. He goes for a Scald, does get a burn, which is pretty unfortunate, and I end up going for the Encore here, which I honestly think is probably a misplay because he's not really going to do anything. I was hoping to maybe trap him with a Calm Mind, but you're never going to Calm Mind in front of a Wobbuffet anyway, so I think Mirror Coating there was definitely the correct call, and I end up taking a bunch of damage, especially with that burn. So Scald would be a 5-hit KO, but with the burn now, it is basically a 4-hit KO. I still decide to stay in because I don't really have a great free switch in, and I do want to get rid of the Suicune substitute, and now that he's Encored and trapped, I know this next turn he has to Scald. So I decide to switch out with Wobbuffet because I think I could actually potentially Hay Now from another Scald, and I would faint from only the burn. And I do have the Custap Berry, so I want to potentially trip him up with that going into the future of the game because I am now in range of Custap. So I switch out and go into Xurkitree. I know Xurkitree can take a Scald pretty easily, and Suicune is pretty much forced to switch out this upcoming turn, and that is the perfect opportunity for me to go for the Z Hypnosis setup. I brought that last week, didn't hit the Hypnosis, although the first one didn't end up mattering because he switched in Conkeldurr, but here there's literally no better time to go for the Z Hypnosis. I'm hoping for, you know, a more offensive threat to come in, but I know regardless, if I hit this, I can Tail Glow and literally just start sweeping through. And so I see Roserade come in, and that's obviously a pretty good sign. Roserade really can't do too much to me, and it does take a little bit of rock, so I go for the Hypnosis, and I know if I hit this, you know, I Tail Glow, and suddenly I can just KO pretty much everything on his team. That being said, I didn't really take into account the priority that he had on his team, like potential Mach Punch, and I go for the Hypnosis, and I actually miss it, so super unfortunate. But of course, I do have the Speed Boost at this point, so I kind of don't want to switch out Xurkitree at this point because I have the Speed Boost, and I actually go for the Hypnosis again. I figure at this point, my best play, because I do have the Speed Boost, is to go for Hypnosis, hope for a 2-turn sleep, go for the Tail Glow, and maybe get a knockout. So we connect there, which is really huge, and this next turn I decide to Tail Glow because if he does stay asleep, then it's actually going to be in KO range the following turn. If he wakes up, it's not the end of the world. We can get a free switch into something like Rayquaza. But at this point, I'm feeling kind of bad about the game because I haven't really done anything. However, the Roserade does stay asleep, which is a really big deal because now Thunderbolt will pretty much KO anything on his team other than probably the Latias. But he does stay in, and this is a +3 Thunderbolt from modded Xurkitree, and it does get the knockout after the Tail Glow. So pretty happy about that. Obviously, we didn't get the maximum output there with Xurkitree because we didn't hit the initial Hypnosis, but we were fortunate enough to connect with the second one. So, you know, I'm not too happy about relying on such a strategy this early on, but obviously your odds of hitting 1 Hypnosis out of 2 are higher than not hitting 1. At this point, I figure he has to have priority with the Infernape, but I decided to give up Xurkitree anyway because I don't think he can really offer me too much other than maybe potentially covering the Suicune. I didn't really have a great switch in there to the Infernape in case he wanted to predict something. So now is the perfect time, I figured, to bring out Wobbuffet and go for the Custap Berry Destiny Bond. I was kind of scared of him going for the Vacuum Wave predicting the Custap Berry, but I figured that is a pretty tough prediction to make, so I just go for the Destiny Bond hoping that he doesn't go for the Vacuum Wave to stall it out, and lo and behold, he doesn't. So that's big because Infernape is definitely one of the biggest threats to my team, especially to the Aegislash in the back. At this point, I'm kind of trying to set myself up for a Mamosine sweep because we know that he's got things like Latias and Yveltal in the back, and Scarf Mammo can just one-shot both of those after the Rock's damage. So my goal is actually to knock out the Suicune at this point. Suicune was by far his safest switch in, so I wasn't too surprised to see that come out here. At this point, I figure, okay, I think it's best to just actually click Shadow Ball. We know he has Substitute, but that's fine. He's going to be whittling away from his health every turn, and we've seen the lefties on the Suicune already, so it's probably not going to be a rest set. So at this point, I'm content to trade Aegislash for Suicune, because if I knock out Suicune, then you look at what's in the back. There's the Yveltal, there's the Lopunny, and... not the Lopunny, sorry, that's on my end. There's the Yveltal, there's the Latias, and there is the Clefable. And if I can get a little bit of chip on Clef, then Mamoswine can just sweep through everything. So this next turn, I actually go for another Shadow Ball because I figure, okay, if Suicune goes for a Substitute, then I basically get a free 25% off. If he decides to Scald, I'll survive, and Shadow Ball with the Life Orb will do enough where he probably can't set up another sub. So obviously I'm really content here because he does end up just going for the sub, so basically get a free 25 minus the 6% that he heals back from lefties. So Suicune is at this point in potential KO range for Rayquaza. I just go for another Shadow Ball here, kind of with the same logic because I know I can take a Scald in Blade form, and that's exactly what happened. So obviously it would have been better to King Shield, but I didn't want the Substitute to go up because Sub was the one thing I was really fearing, but unfortunately Suicune actually hangs on with just a sliver of HP, like probably like 5 HP or so. I think this next turn was a slight misplay on my end because I know Suicune has lefties, and I think it's better just to sack Aegislash, but I decided to King Shield and thinking maybe I could take a Scald in Shield form after switching forms. So I do decide to go for that. Scald obviously doesn't hit here, and he doesn't really have any other options right now. Like, you don't have a great switch in into the Aegislash, so I'm content with just going for Shadow Balls. And so he does go for the Scald. I'm hoping that I can survive this, but unfortunately not. Aegislash does go down. However, I really got what I wanted out of this turn, or out of the last couple of turns, which was bringing Suicune down to a low enough point where I could just get a knockout with Lopunny or Rayquaza, which I have in the back. At this point, I'm basically setting myself up for a late game Rayquaza sweep, or Mamoswine sweep. So I bring in Lopunny, and as you guys saw in the team builder, I did have Power Up Punch, and I in the damage calculator, thought that a power-up punch here would be a guaranteed knockout, but that was for like not max bulb Suicune. So I go for the power-up punch, and I actually don't get the knockout. It doesn't even really come that close, so that was a really big misplay on my end. I think I should have just gone for the return, but I got a little bit greedy, and if I got burned there, that could have been really, really ugly, but fortunately enough, I do survive. I don't get burned. And this next turn, I could have gone for the power-up punch, but I just like didn't want to risk it again, although I think it probably would have gotten the knockout, but I decided to just go for the Drain Punch, heal back a little bit, and more importantly, knock out the Suicune. So the main threat to the Mamoswine is now out the way. So at this point, we know there's Yveltal, Latias, and Clefable in the back, and you can't really switch into Latias or the Yveltal because Lopunny will do a ton to both. So Clef is the only real switch that he has, and I'm completely okay losing my Lopunny here if I get a big return off on Clef, which is exactly what happens. At this point, I feel like I've actually have the game won more or less because I know I can just bring in Rayquaza. Rayquaza gets a free Dragon Ascent. Lopunny basically sacrifices itself, but it gets the damage I need on the Clef. Going for the Dragon Ascent onto Clef means it'll knock it out. You can't really switch into Yveltal or Latias because a Dragon Ascent plus the E-Speed will knock either of those out. So I know I'm guaranteed pretty much to knock out onto Clef. I know I've got Scarf Mamoswine waiting in the back, so I feel like I pretty much should have this won as long as I'm able to hit the attack with the Scarf Mammo. Because I didn't have Ice Shard, I ran Icicle Crash, EQ, Toxic, and Stealth Rocks, which was pretty scary because I didn't have an 100% accurate move to hit the Yveltal and the Latias. But Clef goes down. I know I'm Focus Sash, so I know there's pretty much nothing stopping me from going for a Dragon Dance here. We know that it's Mega Latias, so there isn't anything crazy that can happen here. I mean, sure, it can go for something like a Calm Mind or a Tailwind. Regardless, though, after the Dragon Dance, I'm guaranteed a +1 Dragon Ascent off against the Latias with my Focus Sash. So, gone with the same Rayquaza set multiple weeks, but figured no reason to really deviate from that, especially against Randy's team, because Rayquaza looked really, really good as a late-game sweeper. So, he does go for the Dragon Pulse as expected, but regardless of what he went for there, I was guaranteed this +1 boost and Dragon Ascent. So at this point, I'm like, okay, I just need to click Dragon Ascent, and this will faint. Yveltal will come in, and then I play the mind game of whether I Dragon Ascent or Extreme Speed. But because I conserve my Scarf Mamoswine in the back, I'm in a position to potentially just clean out the game. So Dragon Ascent there does get a clean knockout, which I'm very happy about. Was pretty sure it would get the knockout, but unless he was like super, super, super bulky. And that was scary because it would mean like the Mamoswine would need to hit 2 attacks instead of 1. So Yveltal comes out here, and I have the important decision, do I Extreme Speed or Dragon Ascent, because Extreme Speed will go before Sucker Punch. So if he decides to Sucker Punch, I can just end the game with 2 Extreme Speed. So I felt like Extreme Speed was safer, but he does make the nice call there. I actually do get a critical hit, but he does make the nice call and doesn't go for the Sucker Punch, opts to Oblivion Wing. So this is kind of scary because now if he either crits Mamoswine twice, I don't think a single attack would knock out because I was pretty bulky, or I miss Icicle Crash, I actually still lose the game despite putting myself in a position to close out with Scarf Mammo. So bring out Scarf Mammo, click Icicle Crash, hope for the best, hope there's no miss, and fortunately enough, there is indeed no miss. So we do get the knockout there onto Yveltal, and we do end up taking this series 1-0. So yeah, I think overall I was actually not incredibly happy about how I played a lot of the turns. I think the first turn ended up working out well, but in retrospect, you know, I think going into this team matchup, I should have realized just how important Mamoswine was, and I'm not sure it was worth risking a potential Scald Burn onto it, although it did end up working out quite nicely. So turn 1 was fine. Power Up punching with Lopunny instead of Drain Punching or returning was a really, really big mistake, and I was fortunate that I didn't get burned there, because if I do get burned, then I don't do as much damage to Clef, and it potentially survives a Dragon Ascent. So I would say that was easily my biggest misplay of the game. Otherwise, another potential play that I kind of regret was the Wobbuffet. When I brought it in, I went for the Encore. I think it would have been better, honestly, just to go for the Mirror Coat immediately, because Suicune's not going to be Calm Minding or subbing up in that point. The Encore did mean that it was locked into Scald, so when Xurkitree came out, I could have gone for, you know, pretty much forced it out guaranteed, but I'm pretty sure Suicune would always switch out there. So, a couple of major mistakes, I would say, was going for the Encore with Wobbuffet, going for the Power Up Punch with Lopunny. Those were like the 2 biggest things. I think it probably would have been better to just give up the Aegislash instead of King Shielding the turn that I did. Because if Aegislash does go down there, actually, then Lopunny can come in, go for the Power Up Punch, and that will get the guaranteed knockout, because we saw Suicune hung on with like 6 to 7%. So those were, I think, the main plays that I would point to that could have been better, but otherwise, I was pretty content with how the week went. Obviously, yeah, I don't know, I was kind of hoping to sweep with the circuitry late game, but in the end I ended up just bringing it out earlier, but I was okay with that because it basically knocked out the Roserade, forced the Infernape to come in, and the Wobbuffet was able to knock out the Infernape through the Custap Berry. So Infernape was definitely one of the biggest threats to this team. You see it does neutral or super effective to everything bar Rayquaza, and it could potentially obviously have like Hidden Power Ice or Stone Edge. So I was really happy to have knocked that out earlier on, and it was a good thing because I think Randy's team was very heavily centered around these main offensive sweepers, especially Yveltal, which had been super dominant the first couple of weeks. So I knew I had some pretty good answers to Yveltal with the Circuitry, which if I get the speed boost can one-shot, the Mamo, which could obviously has Ice Cold Crash, which is why I did prioritize rocks earlier up, because if I do get the rocks, then it's in KO range from Ice Cold Crash. And of course Rayquaza at +1 can also knock out. In the end game there, I also obviously could have gone for Dragon Ascent instead of the Extreme Speed. That would have just knocked out Yveltal and closed out the game. At the time I was thinking, okay, I was worried about Scarf Yveltal, so I was like, okay, if it is Scarf Yveltal, Extreme Speed will still go first, then you have to lock yourself into Sucker Punch, and like Mamo could definitely, I think, take even 2 Sucker Punches because I was super bulky, but actually I'm not too sure about that. I think ultimately I would probably have gone for Dragon Ascent instead, but the Extreme Speed did guarantee that Icicle Crush would knock out. That being said, I think Icicle Crush always knocks out, so I think it's actually better just to Dragon Ascent there instead of Extreme Speed, because it's not like I need the chip damage on Yveltal at that point. Of course, hindsight's 20/20. If you did go for Sucker Punch there, then I would have looked a little smarter, but yeah. So ultimately, you know, in terms of this week, I'm pretty happy about how things went. I think some turns could have been a little bit better, especially the Lopunny turn, where I popped the Suicune. But otherwise, you know, I was content with the prep that I had. Nothing too crazy other than Wobbuffet and bringing Z Hypnosis Circuitry, but I think those were both pretty instrumental members of the team this week. I didn't really feel a major need for the members that I didn't bring, which are of course Azelf, Magmortar, Toxapex. I really didn't like Toxapex here because Toxic Spikes isn't hitting Yveltal or Latias. He's got Roserade obviously as well, and I felt like Pex would have mainly been good for the Infernape, but I couldn't really justify dropping any of the 6 that I ended up bringing. Kartana was just pretty bad, especially my fear from Infernape. I couldn't really hit it. And I figured he'd probably have like HP Fire on the Latias and the Roserade. And yeah, I didn't think Azelf and Magmortar really had much room to do here. So, yep, that will wrap up Week 5 of the GBA. So we actually do take down one of the top teams in the league in Randy in a pretty clean game overall. Yeah, I guess the other play I look back at is like going for the Hypnosis and just tail glowing with Circuitry, which was kind of aggressive, but I felt like that was the best way to maximize what I had already done with Circuitry at that point, and I was okay losing it because it would have meant a free switch it into Rayquaza. As you'll know, Randy's team had no switch into Dragon Ascent, so even if Circuitry went down there, Rayquaza would have been able to put on full offensive pressure, so not the worst case there. Ultimately, going into this game, yeah, a couple goals really were to check the Infernape and Suicune as early as possible, and Randy actually allowed me to do that, and that made my life a lot easier, basically. So after that, I was really able to sweep through and set up with Rayquaza and Mamoswine, so pretty clean end game there. Obviously, that doesn't feel great relying on Mamo hitting Icicle Crash, and I did forego Ice Shard specifically for Toxic for Suicune, because I felt like if he had Suicune in the back, you know, and I led Mamo, you could switch in Suicune turn 1, I could just go for the Toxic immediately. So, yeah. But we do move on to 4-1, and I definitely feel good about that one. Randy was an incredible player, a great sport, and just a really fun guy to talk to. So check him out, linked in the description below. That means we are at the midway point of the season. We are 4-1, which is definitely much better than last year. And I know a lot of people have been like, you can't just stick with the same mons over and over again, so don't worry. I do have some plans for the upcoming weeks for switching up the teams, but for weeks 1 to 5, I don't really regret like the team building choices that I made because I felt like the options that I drafted really were just super strong. But that being said, I've already looked forward to the next couple of weeks, and I know there's some things like I can do differently, so yeah, definitely look forward to that. Anyway, that's gonna be it for this one, guys. Thanks for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and we'll see you next week for week 6 of the GBA. All right, peace.